There's been, rhetoric. You and I talked about some things that you said just the other night, dismissing these cops down in Louisiana as racist. You called it a lynching, a murder even. And yet we've also seen some bad shootings, and we've seen out of the Black Lives Matter movement, of which this man was not a part, this shooter in Dallas, chants like pigs in a blanket, fry them like bacon, what do we want, dead cops. Talk about your thoughts on the rhetoric and the need for responsibility on both sides. Let's try this again. I'm trying to get his audio. I can see you speaking, sir. There we go. Go ahead.
Offer condolences for the families and the Philando Casilla family here in St. Paul, Minnesota as well. Secondly, that act of terror last night had nothing to do with a strategy of the civil rights struggle in our country. We strongly condemn in every way possible a planned attack to kill innocent people that happen to have been police. That has no place. I think that there are a number of growing hate groups in our country, but more than hate groups, they have access to military weapons that are stronger than the police can carry, and that's what makes them real dangerous.
But I guess it's been made evident now that this guy was part of some black nationalist group or Black Panther or a bunch of groups, according to Rick Leventhal's reporting.
Well, if you look at the poverty laws, there are a number of white hate groups all over the country,
so what,
and they're heavily armed.
Well, so what are we going to do? Are we going to? I mean, do you believe we should have a law that denies access to anybody who's in a hate group to weapons?
Well, actually, you have to consider, you have to weigh the relative strength or weakness of these groups. When groups can have open and carry military assault weapons, stronger than the police can carry. They can shoot up theaters and churches and can shoot down airplanes. How can we fight a war against weapons of mass destruction, make them available to people on the street corners of our country? It's much too dangerous, Megyn.
I know that you have called out some of the rhetoric we've heard from Donald Trump and some of his supporters. But are you willing to call out some of the rhetoric we've heard? For example, the man who led our show tonight, he calls himself a reverend. He says he was out there last night saying, "Goddamn white America." Forgive me. That's what he was saying. I mean, this kind of thing, if you're going to call it out on the one side, you got to call it out on all. Well,
that type of language does not inform us. It does not inspire us. It does not help us. And so we must be very disciplined in our rhetoric. Even through our pain, we must have a rhetoric flow that lifts us up and not tears us down. Mm-hmm. I say that 5 people are dead and 5 police are dead in Dallas tonight and 7 are wounded. That is a critical situation. But there's a pattern of blacks being killed by police. We cannot get off that agenda. I mean, in some sense, the killing.
But now there's a pattern of cops being killed too. Cops being ambushed.
Well, if you look at the number of the balance of it, the far more cops are killing people. But people should not be killing people. And we need not get in an argument about who kills the most. We should stop the killing. Easy access to high-powered weapons is a danger to American security. And it does not make sense to be fighting wars against weapons of mass destruction while you can buy online weapons that can bring down airplanes. It's totally irrational to me in the name of Second Amendment.
Reverend Jackson, great to see you.
Good to see you, ma'am.
Joining us now with more, Sheriff David Clarke of the Milwaukee County Sheriff's Office. Great to see you, Sheriff. So that this is the message that it's we need to get guns out of the hands of folks like this. But this guy had no record. He was a vet. He was an Army vet, and I don't know. The rhetoric's bad, but I don't know that it caused this guy's behavior.
Megyn, I'm sorry, but I'm still trying to make sense out of that babble that was coming out of the mouth of Jesse Jackson. He was talking about weapons that can bring down airliners. He's talking about surface-to-air missiles. Those aren't on the streets in the United States of America. Mm-hmm. That was a pathetic display of what he did. But look at the situation that we face right now. We have some very irresponsible rhetoric coming from some very powerful people. It is time for this nation to stand up with one voice and to condemn and shun this movement called Black Lives Matter. I would like to see the Southern Poverty Law Center place Black Lives Matter alongside those other hate groups that were mentioned, these black nationalist groups, the Black Panther Party, the Nation of Islam. It doesn't mean that those organizations will go away just because they're on that list, but what happens is people start to delegitimize these movements and marginalize them. This movement needs to be marginalized. We have looked at this stuff. We have peeled back the layers. We've looked at the data. We've looked at the research. None of their false narrative about the use of force, about the American police officer, can be proved. None of it.
But why,
Zero.
how would that
and so
have,
it is
how
time.
would that have helped
But
this?
Megyn,
You know, because this guy wasn't part of Black Lives Matter.
It is time for, he said, according to the chief down there, Chief Brown, he was doing this in the name of Black Lives Matter. He said he wanted to kill
The language
white
was
people.
a little different than that. He did say the latter.
Okay, but it is time for the liberal mainstream media, the New York Times editorial board, the CNN, MSNBC, to stop walking on eggshells and giving legitimacy to these rants, to all this false narrative coming out of this Black Lives Matter movement. Once we do that and marginalize this group, then we can go about all the work. I listened to Loretta Lynch today. I couldn't, that was a great political statement, but nothing else. I don't need to be lectured to her about what we should or shouldn't do after this. I think she should have taken questions. Whenever you have an incident like this, somebody, the chief down there is doing a fabulous job of keeping the public informed. She came out, she intermingled this thing with some, gun control, this, that, and then just, took off. That was irresponsible.
Yeah.
So once, the rhetoric I don't think is going to go away, but we need to delegitimize this Black Lives Matter movement. We've had enough of their nonsense.
Sheriff, I appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Megyn.
And think about that. Think about if there were a situation where somebody was chanting God, Black America, how would that be perceived?